In the heart of Valencia stands a building that was never meant for prayer, yet every stone speaks of devotion. The Lonja de la Seda, the silk exchange, rises like a cathedral, but its altar was commerce, its priests were merchants, and its liturgy was trade. Built between 1482 and 1533, during Valencia's mercantile golden age, this structure was designed to demonstrate one simple truth: economic power deserves monuments as magnificent as any religious faith. Today, UNESCO recognizes it as a World Heritage Site, a masterwork of late Gothic civil architecture that redefined what a secular building could aspire to be. To understand the Lonja, we must first understand the city that built it. 15th century Valencia was experiencing its Segle d'Or, its golden century. The city had transformed itself into one of the Mediterranean's most formidable trading hubs, a crossroads where silk from the east met wool from the north, where spices, ceramics, and precious metals changed hands in deals that shaped empires. Valencia's merchants weren't merely wealthy, they were kingmakers, financing royal ambitions and diplomatic ventures. They needed a building that would announce their arrival on the world stage, a structure that would make visiting traders understand immediately: this was a city of consequence. The city's consulate commissioned master builder Pere Comte to create something unprecedented, a civil building with the grandeur of sacred architecture. This was a radical statement. In medieval Europe, soaring vaults and elaborate stonework were reserved for churches and cathedrals. To apply such architectural ambition to a commercial building was to declare that trade itself was worthy of reverence. The project would span 5 decades and multiple architects, but Comte's original vision, a space that married functionality with transcendent beauty, would guide every chisel stroke. What emerged was not just a marketplace, but a manifesto in stone. Step through the entrance of the Sala de Contratación, the Hall of Columns, and you enter a forest made of stone. This is the heart of the Lonja, the main trading hall where merchants once gathered to negotiate fortunes. The space is dominated by 8 columns, each rising 17 meters toward the heavens. But these are no ordinary pillars. They spiral upward in elegant helical twists, like ancient trees grown in perfect mathematical precision. As they reach the ceiling, each column branches out into ribbed vaults that spread across the space like a canopy of stone leaves. The message is unmistakable: commerce, when conducted with honor, grows toward the divine. The hall's design is a masterclass in Gothic engineering. The helical columns aren't merely decorative, they're structural innovations that distribute weight in ways that allow the vast ceiling to seem almost weightless. The spiraling form creates a dynamic upward thrust, drawing the eye constantly skyward, reminding merchants that their earthly transactions existed within a larger moral framework. The ribbed vaults that spread from each column create a mathematical pattern of intersecting arcs, a visual representation of the complex web of trust, credit, and obligation that made Mediterranean trade possible. Every merchant who entered the space understood: architecture this sophisticated demanded business practices equally refined. The deliberate ecclesiastical references in the Hall of Columns were no accident. The soaring height, the play of light through windows, the sense of ordered spaciousness, all these elements borrowed from church architecture to create what scholars call a temple to commerce. But this wasn't sacrilege, it was a theological argument. The merchants of Valencia believed that honest trade was a form of civic virtue, perhaps even spiritual practice. By housing their transactions in a space that rivaled any cathedral, they were asserting that creating prosperity, employing workers, and connecting distant cultures through exchange was work worthy of divine blessing. The building itself was a sermon about the dignity of commerce. The building's name tells us what commodity mattered most: silk. Valencia had developed a thriving silk industry, with mulberry orchards surrounding the city and workshops producing luxurious fabrics that competed with imports from the east. But the Lonja traded far more than silk. Spices from the Indies, wool from Castile, ceramics from local kilns, wine, oil, precious metals, all flowed through this hall. The silk exchange was both literal marketplace and symbolic center, the place where Valencia's merchants transformed raw materials and distant goods into wealth, and wealth into political influence. The building's grandeur reflected the stakes of what happened within its walls. Inscribed along the frieze that runs around the Hall of Columns is a Latin inscription, a code of conduct that every merchant entering the space would see, a reminder that honest dealing, fair weights, and kept promises were not optional niceties but sacred obligations. The text invokes divine judgment on those who cheat or deceive. In an era before modern contract law, before regulatory agencies or consumer protection, trust was the only currency that truly mattered. The Lonja's architecture enforced this understanding. Its beauty was a daily reminder that trade conducted in such a noble space demanded noble conduct. To betray that trust was to defile a temple. Adjacent to the main hall rises the Lonja's tower, a structure that served dual purposes. On its lower floor sat the chapel, reminding merchants of their spiritual duties. Above, in the tower's secured upper chambers, was the Consulate del Mar, the maritime consulate and merchant tribunal. Here, trade disputes were adjudicated, contracts enforced, and maritime law developed. The physical elevation wasn't accidental. Justice was meant to be above the fray of the marketplace, literally looking down on commercial transactions with detached authority. The tower also served as a visible landmark, a vertical announcement of Valencia's presence that could be seen from approaching ships, a stone lighthouse guiding merchants to safe harbor and fair dealing. As a work of late Gothic architecture, the Lonja represents the style's final, most refined expression. By the time construction began in 1482, Gothic architecture had evolved over 3 centuries. The Lonja demonstrates mastery of every Gothic innovation, pointed arches that direct weight precisely, flying buttresses that allow for thinner walls, ribbed vaults that create visual rhythm while serving structural purposes, and large windows that flood interiors with light. But it applies these techniques to a civil building, proving that Gothic architecture's vocabulary wasn't limited to religious structures. The Lonja is Gothic architecture secularized, its transcendent qualities repurposed for worldly ambitions. Between the main hall and the tower lies the Patio de los Naranjos, the orange tree garden. This open courtyard provided a moment of respite from the intense negotiations inside, a green space where merchants could step away from deals to contemplate, confer privately, or simply breathe. The choice of orange trees was symbolic. Valencia's surrounding Huerta, its agricultural hinterland, was increasingly given over to citrus cultivation, another valuable commodity. The garden reminded merchants that Valencia's wealth didn't come solely from middleman trade but from its own productive capacity. The oranges were both decoration and declaration. We grow our own prosperity here. Valencia's golden age couldn't last forever. By the 17th century, the center of European commerce was shifting northward to Amsterdam, London, and Hamburg. The discovery of the Americas had reoriented trade routes, and Spain's economic decline diminished Valencia's relative importance. The Lonja continued to function, but its glory days were past. Yet the building persisted, its physical magnificence outlasting the economic forces that created it. Unlike wooden structures or temporary market stalls, this temple to commerce was built to endure. Even as Valencia's merchant class lost power, their monument remained, a permanent testament to a moment when the city stood at the center of the Mediterranean world. By the 20th century, the Lonja had survived wars, political upheavals, and centuries of changing use. Restoration efforts worked to return the building to its original splendor, carefully removing later additions and repairs that had obscured Com's original vision. In 1996, UNESCO designated the Lonja de la Seda as a World Heritage Site, recognizing it as an exceptional example of late Gothic civil architecture and a tangible representation of Mediterranean mercantile culture at its zenith. The designation wasn't just about architectural merit. It acknowledged the Lonja's significance as a monument to a particular moment in human history when cities like Valencia were inventing the systems of international trade that would eventually become global capitalism. Walk through the Hall of Columns today and you walk through emptiness, but it's an eloquent emptiness. No merchants haggle here, no silk changes hands, no contracts are signed beneath those spiraling pillars. Yet the space speaks more powerfully in silence than it perhaps ever did in the noise of commerce. The helical columns still rise toward their branching vaults, the light still filters through the windows in the same geometric patterns it did 5 centuries ago. The building has become what it perhaps always aspired to be, not a functional marketplace but a monument to an idea, that human enterprise, properly conducted, builds civilizations and deserves to be celebrated in enduring stone. The Lonja's influence extended beyond Valencia. Its demonstration that secular architecture could achieve the grandeur of religious buildings helped pave the way for the great town halls, exchanges, and civic buildings of the Renaissance. Architecture historians trace lines of influence from Valencia's silk exchange to other European trading cities that sought to express their own commercial power in stone. The specific innovation of the helical column became a recognized Gothic motif, appearing in later buildings across Spain and beyond. The Lonja proved that a building type, the commodity exchange, could be as architecturally significant as a cathedral or palace. It expanded the vocabulary of what architecture could celebrate. What the merchants of Valencia's golden age understood, perhaps more clearly than we do, is that buildings are arguments. The Lonja de la Seda argues that commerce is noble, that cities can achieve greatness through trade, that the pursuit of prosperity, when conducted ethically, deserves monuments as lasting as any built for kings or gods. The 8 helical columns of the Hall of Columns make this argument without words, through proportion and light, through the simple fact of their beauty and the complexity of their engineering. 5 centuries after the last stone was laid, the argument still stands, inviting us to consider what we believe worthy of our finest efforts, our greatest artistry, our most enduring monuments. Today, the Lonja de la Seda stands in Valencia's historic center, open to visitors who come to marvel at what medieval merchants built with silk profits and civic pride. The building hosts occasional exhibitions and cultural events, but its primary function now is simply to exist, to remind us of a time when a city believed so deeply in the dignity of commerce that it built a temple to house it. Standing beneath those 17-meter columns, looking up at the stone branches spreading across the vaulted ceiling, you experience what those 15th-century merchants intended: awe at human capability, respect for the systems of trust and exchange that connect distant peoples, and recognition that sometimes our greatest monuments emerge not from war or worship, but from trade.